Here we go. Hey,
Right?
everybody. LT here. Super excited to have this conversation with my homegirl, Professor Shantal Marshall, Associate Professor of Psychology at Nevada State. Shantal, say hi to the people.
Hello, people. I don't know how many of you there are, or why you're tuning in, but welcome.
It's the world. We're talking to the world.
Sure.
So today we are actually giving an overview of the 2021 Catalyst Awards hosted by First Gen and Juice, which is meant to honor first gen representation in pop culture. Chantel and I are going to go through the different categories. This isn't the time where we're making any predictions or anything. In fact, Chantel hasn't watched, seen, or heard any, or very few.
Couple, very few,
One
yes.
one of these nominees, and I'm familiar with many of them, but that's not the point of today. Today we are actually having more of a macro conversation, a big picture conversation of why it's important to focus on first gens in pop culture, and by that we're talking about fiction, non fiction, memoir, podcast, films, and TV shows. Woo woo. Um, One thing we were just talking about before we started today is West Side Story, which Chantel says is not a first gen story. Is that right?
Very much not a first gen story. There's some interesting comments made in the beginning of the film. I didn't watch the first one, so I'm not sure um if it stays true to the original, but at some point both at some point even the white group is kind of talked down to because they did not move up the social ladder. So like
Oh,
they're kind, yeah, so that was an interesting bit to the movie that even I think he's like a detective or something kind of looks down on them because he's like other he was like some people from this neighborhood moved on up, they became like I don't know, lawyers and other stuff, but not your grandparents and parents. They stayed here. And I was like, dang,
damn!
rude.
White
Um,
trash shaming.
yes, yeah. So that was an interesting, comments just about the people that did not kind of move up the social ladder and what that may say about them or their parents or their lineage or something. Just kind of odd.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um, well, here's the thing. I feel like you and I could take a first gen lens to
Hmm.
like almost anything. And I think that's something for people to consider too. It's really about
Yeah.
the perspective that you
That's true.
take.
Yeah.
I'll just give a quick rundown history of the Catalyst Award. So it started a year ago, um, where I was like the goal really for me, like my personal goal is really to shift and shape the way we think about the first generation identity and recognizing, in fact, some of the more complicated, progressive conversations happening about this population actually happening on TV shows and in movies, and really wanting to recognize that. So last year, like I said, reached out to a group of friends all across the country, volunteers who judge, and then we decided to bring it back. And we today we're like I said, we're going to review high level the this year's nominees. Actually, I want to start. So, Chantel, I want to show um, an image of the purpose of the awards and get your just get your take on it. So sit tight for that. All right, can you see that there?
I can.
Awesome. So here is the mission of the Catalyst Award. So to celebrate complex storytelling about the first gen experience, like I said, and also continue to increase the visibility of first gens within pop culture and mass media. And I just want to ask you, when you think about first gens and pop culture, what resonates for you? What comes to your mind?
When you asked me to have this conversation with you, I started to like think about that, and it was it's always a little sad because not a lot comes to mind. Do you know what I mean? Like, it, as a first generation college student myself, I know that I didn't really have a lot of characters or other stories that I could look to when I was in college, which, you know, now was a while ago. But it's I think it's almost like the inability to name a lot of characters and stories is really what kind of resonates with me, where I'm just like, I don't know, are there first gen? You know what I mean?
Mm, yeah.
Whereas when you think of other stories, other kind of tropes, I'm like, oh yeah, let me tell you about all this, and then there's this story, then there's that one, and then there's over
Yeah.
here. And so it's for me, it's like just always a little sad that I have a hard time coming up with those kinds of stories for myself.
Hmm.
Um, but I do know that the first time I really read a story about, or I think the first time I really like saw it front and center was in college, in a class I was taking on oppression. I think that was one of the words in the title. And a sociology class, and I'm trying to remember what it's called. I'd have to look it up. But anyway, it's about a young, um, it's about a black male student who is first gen, you know, he's low income, goes to, I believe, an Ivy League, I want to say Yale or Princeton or something like that. And he just has a
Probably.
really hard time. And I remember like a big part of it was like the music, right? He brings his music, he's playing his
Mm,
CDs or whatever it is, and his roommate is just like, what is this? And
mm,
so it really takes his perspective and really shows, you know, how uncomfortable it is, how uncomfortable it is to be in this space, even when it is such a um, revered and sacred space. And everyone's like, oh, you should be so happy to be there. And he's like, this is awful, you know? And so I think that that was the first time I really thought about um, the necessity of having it be very clear that
mm,
even those of us who make it into these spaces, that doesn't mean that we're going to feel great, because these spaces aren't meant for us, you know?
mm,
And like, it's
hmm.
okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to um, be explicit about that feeling. So
Yeah.
sorry, that was a very long answer
It
to
was not. It was not. It
a
was a very, it was a
question.
very complex answer, and it made me
Yeah.
think of a number of things. One, actually, I think it would be a really interesting exercise, especially in the Empowering First Gen Facebook group, to ask people, what characters have you seen that like that actually reflected your experience? I'd be curious about that. The other thing I thought about too is, while we're seeing more diversity currently, there are some historical characters. I'm thinking of TV shows, for example, where there are first gen experiences, but like the Waltons or even Dawson's Creek, um, but it wasn't as explicit, right?
Yeah.
I think we're starting to see
Mhm.
more of that uncomfortability, like really some of the first gen themes, which is what we're about to get into in a
Yeah.
minute. Um, so, and I guess I'll just say one more thing. There's a recent annotated bibliography project that I was a part of, and from 2009 to 2018, and part of it is about mass media and pop culture. And so, it's a good resource for people who are wanting to see where some of these stories are outside of research. So, all right, let's look into
Can I
our
ask
first
you a
count.
can I ask
Yeah,
you a quick question though?
of course,
Maybe we
of
have
course.
time.
Of course, girl, we got all the
So,
time.
okay. So, because as I'm thinking about it, and I'm just wondering what your take on this is that sometimes those of us with identities that are not well represented in media kind of borrow other people's, right? We're like, well, that's kind of close.
Right,
So
right.
I, you know, so I'm
Jason.
gonna kind of follow that. And I'm just wondering if you think there are any other types of characters that first gen, if people with a first gen identity might be drawn towards. So
Oh,
the
that's
one
so
I'm thinking
good.
of
That's so
is
good.
um, the reluctant hero. right? Which is a huge trope, right? So somehow you are
Yeah.
the chosen one. You had no idea. You never asked for this. There's a moment of like, you know what, I'm going to step away, but somehow you're sucked back in because of the goodness of your heart, whatever, right? So to
Yeah.
those are the stories I am very drawn to. For me in high school, it was Buffy. That's still one of
Okay.
my favorite shows, even though
Yeah.
I don't share many identities with those characters. That feeling of responsibility, right, to be the one, has always resonated really well
Damn,
with me.
that's
So I'm
so
just
good.
wondering if you had that experience.
We are 7 minutes in already, mind blown. Yes, you know what it was for me? The pioneer girl. That
Mhm.
literally it was
Mhm.
Laura Ingalls Wilder. Like that,
Yeah.
she was my home girl.
Mhm.
I remember this book called Caddy Woodlawn.
Oh,
She,
I never read
I don't
that.
even remember. I just know she
Uh-huh.
lived. She was a pioneer. She was out in the pioneer. And so just
Interesting.
I get literally,
Okay.
you know,
So
out
very
there
independent, like doing it yourself.
doing it yourself.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
But if and for
Interesting.
me specifically, a girl, but also I was, you know, I grew up working class, and so you're independent, but it's because you have to be like you're
Yeah.
just
You have
making
to
the
be
most of
self-sufficient.
self-sufficient. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, so
Cool.
good.
I'd love
Very
to
nice.
hear from people watching if there's any other type of story or character that again was kind of close in that feeling, right? But
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily a first gen
To
character or
college.
story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I really appreciate that. And I think when we're thinking about this moment, the shifts we're seeing is more direct, like what you and I actually
Yeah.
went through in
Yeah.
school.
Mhm.
And that's what's really exciting. So let's take a look at the first
Okay.
category, woo, 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 which is fiction. And uh-uh, here it is. Oh, there we go. Uh, First category is fiction, which is a spectrum. So we've got Everywhere You Don't Belong. Actually, let me see. One, two. I've read two and a half of these, Shantal.
Okay.
So,
Half on
uh,
purpose, or you're just halfway through it right now?
okay, no, you know how I am. So we talked about this with West Side Story. Like when it ain't working for me, I
That's
just
why I
stop.
asked.
Right. You
That's
know?
why I asked.
So that's why it's a
We
half.
won't divulge which one that one
We won't say which one it
which
was.
that is. We won't influence the judges. Okay. Well, I've
um,
read zero, so
okay, there we go. So Everywhere You Don't Belong, Girls with Bright Futures, The Kindest Lie, The Firekeeper's Daughter, What's Mine and Yours. One thing I will say, I just saw this morning about The Firekeeper's Daughter. Apparently, this is a really popular young adult novel, and it won Goodreads Best YA Novel of the Year. So
oh,
yeah, exactly.
we already
Um,
have an award winner in the list.
we do. And that happened last year too. One of our nominees, of course, I'm forgetting the name right now, but it was a really popular novel that was also a first gen story. So good for us. One thing that you and I were communicating about over email was the issue of the racial and ethnic diversity of authors. So no white dudes, basically. I
Not
know
this
you want to
year.
not exactly co-option to come. But
Yes, yes.
what any thoughts that you had about this particular category or questions you might even have?
Well, I just, if you don't mind, since I don't know the background of the process, these were put forward by
Oh,
people in the Empowering First Gen group, or how
oh,
did these come to be on the list?
great question. So what had happened was
Mhm.
actually this year I did it a little bit differently. I starting January of this year, 2021, I actually just started keeping a ongoing list, and
Mm.
periodically I would either ask people who were judges last year or just check in with the folks in the Empowering First Gen page. Like, what are you all reading that has these themes? And so that's how many of the nominees came about.
Yeah.
Or for me, just like, I'm on Goodreads and things pop up. And I think for 3 or 4 of them, like part of the descriptions talks about the characters being first gen. Girls with Bright Futures is going to benefit from the whole varsity blues scandal because it's about
Mm.
parents who do whatever it takes in
Mm.
order to get their student into an elite institution. In this
Mm.
case, it is
Mm.
Stanford University.
Well.
But the interesting thing is like the first gen character in that novel is a white student. Well,
Mm.
the mom actually is first gen,
Mhm.
or would be first gen or something like that. Yeah.
Mhm. So that's awesome, and I think you should just make that list public so we can all peruse it, you
Okay.
know?
Hmm.
Because I know I'm always on the lookout for books, and I just like my brain stops working whenever I go to search, you know? Like how do I even begin to tell the search bar what I'm interested in? So that would be awesome. I mean,
Ooh.
I'd be curious to see, because we have seen first gen stories be told by white men, and white men are a good chunk, I would say, of first gen stories, especially in because colleges were largely letting in white male students,
Hmm.
and many of them were not the were not benefiting from having parents who had gone to college. So I mean, as the ever researcher, I'd be curious to see if there are differences in the way the stories are told, but also why the stories are told. Because there's a book slash movie that will not be named that has like that why do we tell this story to show you that you can just get rid of your awful family, right, and like move into a new realm of society, and
I think
you
I
just
know
got
what
to
story you're
work
talking about.
you just got to work hard enough. And I don't know if that's not my story. So I'd be curious to see how authors of color, or
Mm,
if you can, when you read the story, figure out why that particular story needed to be in the arc, because
mhm,
there's always a why. And this is what I tell my students when we are analyzing pop culture. They always have this assumption, which is so odd to me, that like pop culture just exists,
right.
right? And it's just there, and
Uh-huh.
there were no decisions that
Right.
led to
It's just it just is what
existing.
it is.
And so it takes so long to say no. Why would they decide this needs to be the main character, that this is you
Mhm,
know the hardship they experience, or this is the way they solve the problem, or this is what the ending is. All of these are decisions, and there's decisions about which stories are worth telling, right? So
mhm,
even if they tell the best story and it's amazing and it's raw and it's emotional or whatever the case may be, someone else, a publisher, has to decide this story is worth telling. And and there are a lot of stories that have just gone untold because they were like, nobody wants to hear that.
mhm,
So anywho, I'd be curious to see why the authors wanted to have that particular, what is the takeaway from that character's
mm,
story that they're hoping the reader will get. Because to me, it can go in at least two very different ways, right? This like, um, leave it all behind, work hard, you can get into the higher realms of society, is at least one of them. And then another, which is you're changing the trajectory of your entire family, right? This is a shift in the way that um, you think about yourself, and future generations might think about themselves. So, and that, I'm sure there's more, but those are the two I tend to kind of categorize these stories into. So, yeah.
Okay, two things I want to respond
Okay.
to. Let me pick up on the most recent one, the need for sharp criticism, right? So these texts, they're going to come out more and more, to be
Yeah.
honest, right?
Hmm.
So how can we sharpen our critical thinking about this, and then also create a parallel critical framework for addressing these things? Like you said, they don't just exist. We have to apply a lens to them.
Yeah.
So plug for that. Can we go back to what you said though about how do we find these stories? That is so great. Like the need for some kind of either like labeling or
Yeah.
or when we think about you and I talked about this too with Netflix, the way that Netflix used to categorize stories and
Yeah.
now the nuanced ways. Can you talk a little
Hmm.
bit more about like that sort of search function or the importance of identifying, being able to identify these stories?
You mean just in terms of how we need it? How it's necessary?
Yeah, go with
Yeah.
that. Go with
I
that.
mean, I think part of it is just that these types of stories are so few and far between. I'll and it's this, but it's other like genres that I'm interested in too, where I feel like I don't have a way to just find more like these, right? And maybe that's because I'm not on Amazon. I don't know. Like that's Amazon's thing, right? If you like this, then you'll also like these things. But I find it hard to do that with these types of less prominent storylines
Mhm.
where they resonate with me. Now, right? Because before I felt like I had to kind of borrow other stories that kind of fit my experience best. But now I really want my own. I want to see people who um look like me, right? Or who've had experiences like I have. Like I'll tell you, when I read Sonia Sotomayor's memoir,
Best friend.
I did I tell you this? I was like, is this how other people feel when they read most stories?
Right?
That they I it was I mean, it was like an epiphany of this is what it feels like to be represented. This is what it feels like to see your own story, but not quite your story. And so you kind of like are learning from like the decisions they made, even though they were in a similar situation to you. I mean, I was very sad because it had never happened. I was mid 20s, late
Right.
20s when it
Yeah.
happened.
Uh,
Um, but yeah, how do I find more of those? Because it's once you experience it, it's very hard to go back.
Go back. Yeah.
It's very hard to go back. Um, so you felt similarly when you read her memoir?
I did. I remember, there's some when you get a good book, you're consuming it and then you're getting
Mhm.
closer to the end and you start to panic because you don't want it to end.
Yeah.
That happened for me for sure.
Mhm.
With
Mhm.
that. And I was just like you, like, what?
Yeah.
This is what it could have been.
Right? Yes, what it could have been. Yeah, it made me sad and angry, to be quite honest, that
Mm,
I didn't even know what I was missing.
yeah.
And I studied it, even at that time, I would say I was an expert in pop culture, becoming one, and I still had no idea what that was like. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, so yes, that's why we need better search functions, right? We need better sources
Hmm.
uh, that will give, because the ones I don't know, the ones you listen to the lists, for example, NPR puts out, and I love NPR. I listen to NPR every single day, but I look at that list and I'm like, you know.
Hmm.
So yeah, so it's just how do you find those? Because once you find one, you can usually
Right.
find a little thread. But I've just
Yeah.
had a hard time finding those.
Although I will say this is actually a great segue to the next category, which
Mhm.
is memoir and um, like why do I keep doing this? Memoir and nonfiction, because um, We're just gonna announce that um, Sonia, so like her book would have just been it's an honorary
Oh
Catalyst
yes,
Award winner,
yes,
hands
yes.
down. But look at all these here, and I think,
Mhm.
aren't you familiar? Do you know Michael Tubbs? Is that what you told me one day?
I do. I believe that he was an undergrad at Stanford when I was a graduate student. And so I, know him might be a strong
Okay,
phrase,
okay. Fellow Cardinal.
but I've met him. I've met him.
Oh, you did
And
actually meet him though.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when I was at Stanford, I got to know pretty much every graduate student of color that was on our campus.
Mm,
And the undergraduate population is pretty small. So once you are in those spaces, you tend to run into the same people over and over again, and he was one of them. So,
makes sense. I
yeah.
you know, a couple of things are coming to mind for me as you were talking. I'm looking at this category, contrasting it to fiction. First, let me go ahead and anticipate a question you're going to ask. So, when it came to these nominations, one thing that we look for isn't just is the author first gen, right? Because that could just be a whole bunch of people, but in their storytelling, are they addressing their first gen experience? Because it's often the case where all that just gets overlooked, and they're telling when you go back to the how and the why that you mentioned before. So in these particular instances, some aspect of their experience, either as a pre, current, or post first gen student, is addressed. So that's what's
Okay.
really nice.
Mhm.
Um, I'm also looking at these folks and noticing the in some cases, more diversity in terms of what schools or institutions they attended.
Mhm.
One trope that's been established already in first gen narratives is that not only what you said before about leaving the family behind, but you are going to Stanford, Yale, Harvard, right? You don't go to a state school. That doesn't.
Much less
And
a
that's
community college.
you don't go to the community college. So that's more common in this year's fiction pieces, nominations. Um, so of course, Michael did go to Stanford, I believe. The author of Beautiful Country, I think she went to Harvard. But the other ones that there's, just to let people know. Oh no, never mind. I take that all back. Kiara went to Yale, so never mind. That trope just it persists.
It's
It
just there.
persists. It,
So
it, it yeah.
then that question, there's so many questions there.
Okay.
So I'll ask you, I mean, there's so many possibilities as to why this has taken hold. Um, but I I'd love to figure out a way to know what the answer is, I guess, or answers are. So do we think that here's a few different possibilities, right? That first gen students who go to a state school or community college um don't think their stories are worth telling,
Okay.
right?
A.
Or
Uh-huh.
A, and so they don't write them, or so there's that possibility.
Hmm.
Two, perhaps, let's be gracious in one potential explanation, perhaps the first gen identity is not as salient in those spaces because there's more first gen students, perhaps.
Maybe.
Um, or is it that those students or former students are writing their stories, but publishers or others are just saying, no,
Yeah.
that's not quite
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
we want
Hmm. Yeah.
to talk about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have
You
any
went
sense?
to Nevada State College? Who cares?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you have any sense of that? If
Um,
you had to guess?
my guess, it all has to do with like the the network that comes along with going to these elite schools like Stanford and
Oh,
Harvard,
okay.
right? And connections to publishers.
Mhm.
So, and the fact that it's just presumed that these institutions have a certain level of value that Nevada State College doesn't. And in addition to all the other things you said, so it
Yeah.
all plays a put like it all reinforces one another. Because of that, um, NSC students don't see the value in writing their story. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So,
Mhm.
and it's funny
Yeah.
because Stanford is definitely in a lot of these narratives. Stanford is the new Harvard. I don't know what is that about, Chantel?
I don't know. As I've mentioned, I was there for graduate school. Um, I don't know. I mean, it could be, um, this is, I don't know if this is a great explanation, but this is what happened to me. My experience was that I did apply, not for undergrad. So for undergrad, I was definitely like a typical first gen story that I didn't even think to apply to schools outside of public schools.
You went to
And
the elite public
yeah, I
school.
went to the elite public school. Um, and so when I applied for graduate school, then I was like, oh, there's these other public private schools that are really good. And um, I applied to like the Princeton, and I did not apply to Harvard for grad school. And of course, Stanford. And when I got into Stanford, my family knew it because it had sports. So I don't know if somehow Stanford, right? It has
Oh,
notoriety on both sides, right?
oh,
It's
that's
known for
good.
its like education, of course, but also it has the cool factor of
Oh my
having really good
gosh.
sports. So I don't know if that's part of it, or at some point things just get played out. Like how many times can you talk about Harvard before you're done? And then so you kind of go to something that's close and you're like, oh well, let me use Stanford as the school instead of Harvard because Harvard's played out. And now that kind of takes off, so maybe it'll become Brown next. I don't know, because
Yeah, but I
Brown, I
think,
feel like, is always like the one people, at
oh
least in
yeah,
my world,
it's,
kind of forget about.
oh no, no, it's the total out. Are our parents gonna let us go to Brown? No. School called Brown? Not happening. But you're right. You know what? I feel like Stanford has this sort of weird perception of being accessible but elite at the same time.
Well, I take my story back.
Okay.
I think it is the cool. I think there is a coolest. So it actually has a third thing, I would say, right? So it is
Hmm.
the elite education. I do think it has a coolness factor, but it's right next to Silicon Valley.
Ah,
I don't think we can really
oof,
underestimate the power of
of
that.
that. Yeah.
So, mhm.
You know what? I was reflecting on my own experience. So for me, that was Georgetown.
Mm,
Georgetown. So remember, I come from a sport loving, no college going, but sports loving family. Georgetown was close by. It was the good schools, elite, but it
mhm,
had basketball. So then my
mhm.
family like, oh, 100%.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I think when it comes to if you and I are addressing um, students or future potential writers, tell your story. Like
Yeah.
this is also our call that no matter what institution you attend, please calculate, um, uh, know that your story matters, right? And we also need to
Mhm.
change publishers and what they're interested in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too. I mean, I wonder as I think about the younger students in my classes now who come in with a very strong first generation college student identity, which I know you said you did not have when you started college. Mine was there, but I don't know if it was as strong, right, as it is for students now. If it will just become one aspect of their story, which I think is probably better. Like, I don't know if they're going to want to tell their story of college, right? But their
Mm.
life story will only make sense if you understand that part
Woo,
of their
woo.
story, right?
Yeah.
Um, so maybe we'll see it that way. It's less like a let me tell you what college was like for me because I was first gen at Nevada State or,
Hmm.
the community college down the street. But right uh in my quest to become XYZ, or in the
Hmm.
path I ended up on to become, whatever I am now, it's important to know that about me, that I was the first in my family to go to college. So my experience of college was this, and then next steps, next steps,
Mm,
next steps, and this is where we are
mhm,
now. Which I think that would be great to
mhm.
have it folded in
Yeah.
to the stories would be cool. So yeah,
All right.
we'll
Let,
see.
let's look at films. We're going to switch
Okay.
now. We're leaving behind books. Bye bye. And we are going to talk about film. So, and it's called narrative film because last year we also had a documentary category, but did not
Oh,
have any nominees this
okay.
year,
Hmm.
surprisingly.
So
Okay,
sad.
but we've got a really popular, highly anticipated film, In the Heights.
Mhm.
Also, the first gen character, Stanford.
This is the only one I've seen.
Look at
And I
that.
saw the musical while I was a student at Stanford.
Oh
So
my gosh.
I have a lot of thoughts.
And then the other two, I believe, is Holler. I can't remember how one access Hollers, either Netflix or Apple TV. Holler, though, is about a first gen student in a rural area. And then Coda, interesting thing about that one is the main character is the only hearing person in her family. Everyone else
Mm.
is deaf,
Uh-huh.
and she's in a rural area. Oh look at the little lighthouses in the background. Do you see them both? Like these are.
In
Oh
the
no.
for the movie?
Oh, hold on. I'm looking at the poster. I don't know that that's a lighthouse in the background of
Oh,
Holler.
on the left? It looks
Yeah.
like
What is
one.
that?
It looks
Right?
like one.
That's like some kind of that's a signifier.
I, someone decided it.
That's
Someone
right.
decided to include it.
That's right. That's telling us
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, what I was saying about Coda, she is the literal translator for her family.
Wow.
They're a fishing family, and her goal is to go to college, right? But then
Mm.
it's not a hard. I don't believe she's going to Ivy League, but what it means for her to leave her family, what that would mean for her to leave her family, right? That's really dependent upon her. So major that's a major first gen theme there.
I do love the representation. Well, I'll watch it first, but I like the idea of representing deaf characters in a
Hmm.
film. We don't see a lot of deaf characters in in anything. So
Hey, real quick on I hope you don't lose your other thought, but I just want to say one of the nominees from last year was a character from a short-lived series called Deaf You, and it
mm-hmm,
was set at Gallaudet University
mm-hmm,
for the hearing impaired. And
mm-hmm,
one of the characters, he's Black and first gen and working class, and describing what that is like, the
yeah,
intersection of those
mm-hmm,
identities. Yeah.
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
any other reactions to this category? Short category, small
It
one
is
this
a
year.
small category.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I would be curious to see how the other two films portray the colleges. Because like so for me in the Heights, the first when I saw the musical, and the musical is different from the film. There were
okay.
changes made.
Okay.
Um
We may want to talk about that. Go ahead.
I don't even remember the storyline. I just remember being very irritated about it because all of the all of the conflict was put on her, on the student. I don't remember her name now, but
In the film or
she
in the
in the
play?
musical, in the play,
Uh-huh.
she was just really uncomfortable at
Hmm.
Stanford,
Yeah.
and um there was no real, from what I remember, like conversation about the college's role in all of this.
Hmm.
And I believe at the end of the play she doesn't go back.
She doesn't go back.
Yeah. And so it was just like, wait, what? Like it was like I don't think that that she has to go back, right? I would never say that. Like, of course, every decision is within a larger context and all of that stuff. And for some people, it is the right decision to not be in a place that makes you really uncomfortable. Um, but it almost felt like, I remember now, um, the takeaway was like, just stay where you're comfortable. Just stay where you're comfortable. And I was like, that just seems not the point, right? Um, and maybe it made me upset because to some extent my family reacted that way when I would
Mm,
tell them, you know.
mm,
And I now have students who will both at my institution and just other students I've met who will kind of tell me the things that their parents or family is saying that isn't really as supportive as those family members think it is. And I have to remind them, and I have to really like remember this as a student. They're loving you the way they know how to love you, right? So when they see you being really uncomfortable and they see you feeling like an imposter, and they hear you saying, I don't know if I want to be here, they're like, well, then don't be there,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Like, just come
Stay
home
home.
and we'll love you, and we'll find you a job, you'll be fine, just like everyone
Mhm.
else has been fine. Like,
We'll feed you.
um
That's always a big
yeah,
one.
yes. And so, you know, when I shifted my own mindset to say, this isn't about me, this is about the school and what they should be doing in order to have all students feel comfortable, or at least
Mhm.
not have some students feel extremely uncomfortable, then I could better respond to my family, because I was like, no, 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 I'm going to stick it out. And I'm also going to help other students not feel so out of place. Um, but
And
yeah,
that's what
it
she
just,
does.
yeah.
Nina. Nina is her
Is
name.
that her name? Mina.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yes. So that's a better, to me, that, yeah, it just, I remember going to the play and just being really upset. That was, kind of what the message was about trying to move up or out. That, I just
Yeah.
felt like,
And so they course corrects, so to speak, in the film
hmm,
by addressing what harm she
yeah,
experienced at the institution
right, yeah,
and her wanting to channel that and also support another first gen, right?
mhm, mhm.
You're
Yeah,
reminding,
because
go
that
ahead.
story where she is accused of stealing something,
Yeah,
that's not in the original
not at
story.
all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that, first of all, it's super realistic.
Uh, mm,
So I'm glad they added that. I am glad they added, a little bit more of like, it's not her,
mhm,
she's being
mhm.
pushed out. She's not just deciding that it's not for her. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, no. I was just going to say, you reminded me that the screenwriter for the film of In the Heights, Kiara, who I was just mentioned before, her own memoir is nominated, My Broken Language, and it's
Mm,
based on her own experience as a
um,
first gen student.
I
So
see.
I haven't read her book. I'm actually picking it up from the library today.
Hmm.
Be interesting to see how much of her own experience um, parallels what we
Yeah.
see with Nina,
Hmm.
like if she writes about that too. So I'll let you know.
I have a question for you. We don't have to discuss it, but I just remembered that, I know in conversations we've had, like in the Empowering First Gen Facebook group, um, we often lament that first gen is, uh, in a lot of people's minds, synonymous with low income,
Uh-huh.
right? Just people conflate the two all the
Yeah.
time. And I'm wondering if, because it sounds just from the movies that are listed here. I know In the Heights, right? The big
Yeah.
problem is they have to
Yeah.
pay for it and all this
Class.
stuff. Um, and it sounds like in the other two as well, because they're kind of rural and stuff like
Yeah.
that, that income is going to be the main
Mhm.
reason. Like, it's
Mhm.
income is really the difference, right?
Yeah.
Um, if you've come across any films or other stories where they're not low income, but they are first gen.
Yes, hold on to that.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Okay, that's coming up. That is
Okay.
coming up. All right. Stay tuned. All right, so let's switch to we're going to switch to TV shows now and comedy. So, okay, so listen, last year we did not have the separation of, we had a TV shows category, but we didn't separate comedy from drama. We just had so many TV shows nominated
Yeah.
this year that we had to find a way
Wow.
to separate them.
Yeah.
So there wasn't like 10 nominations, but one of the things I wanted to, okay, so they are Jenny and Georgia, Sex Lives of College Girls, and Young Rock. And what we do for these is, again, we're just looking at representations in one particular year, number one. So it had to have aired or been published or created in this year, 2021. But when it comes to a TV show, what I did for the judges was identify particular episodes that they could hone in on.
Mhm.
So it doesn't have to be the whole show.
Yeah.
But these characters, I mean, are all first gen. So um, so it's part of and it's part of their lives, something you addressed too. So
Mhm.
so for Jenny and Georgia, I just want to point out that it's Jenny, the daughter, who will be first gen, and she's still in high school. And
Oh, okay.
then we get to the sex lives, I mean, as it's implied, as it shows in the title. It's about their experience in college, and it's actually one of the white characters from a small town. Trope, 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 trope.
Mhm.
Um, who is low income.
Okay. And are they at an elite college?
They, of course, they are, ma'am. What
Okay.
other kind of college is there? Um, and then Young Rock. The interesting thing about this show is there's four different. It actually shows Dwayne Johnson's life from four different eras. So he,
So all of those are
all of
him
them are,
in the
all of them are
poster.
him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and one of those, the one where he's like all buff and little shorts there, is his
Mhm.
college experience,
Oh, okay.
and he's an athlete.
Hmm.
And so he talks in this particular episode that's highlighted about like the sacrifices his parents made. Like they moved to be close to him in Florida. He went to school at University of Miami.
Oh, hmm.
And then he also talks about his grandmother on his mom's side who was undocumented. And like all this is happening while he's in school. So
Wow.
what's compelling about
Yeah.
particularly these three is the range of first gen experience. It
Yeah.
isn't just about being in college. It's before college, during, after, and how it all impacts. Kind of like what you were talking about before earlier. But
Right. Yeah.
what you thinking?
Well, first I'm thinking that I don't normally like sitcoms, but but you're making me want to watch The Young Rock because that sounds really interesting. Like especially because it is a comedy, right? So how do you make comedy out of that? I
Comedy.
mean, I know we make comedy out of our lives all the time, but I you know, whenever I see stories like this, and when I say stories like this, I mean highly underrepresented narratives. I
Hmm.
always wonder how people who don't have these experiences are going to watch it, right? Because a lot of people are going to watch The Young Rock because they're fans of The Rock. I mean, he has quite the
Hmm.
following. And so, yeah. So sometimes I try and watch these things with two minds, right? Like, okay, do I see myself represented or my story if it's supposed to kind of be similar? But also, how is someone who has no idea what this is like, or how are they going to experience this? And that's where I sometimes become a little worried, right? Because part of it is when there is so little representation of a particular identity, any one single representation carries a lot of weight.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I'm just curious to see, like, sometimes it's inside jokes, right? Like the first gen story has a lot of, or like being low
Yeah.
income or having your family not understand what college is like or whatever. There's like a lot of inside jokes there, but I'm so curious to know like continuing gen people will understand those things, like sometimes it becomes pity.
Hmm.
Like, oh my gosh, you did that? And I'm like, yes.
Okay, go ahead. Oh, you're setting up this next category so well, so well. But okay, but can we talk though? I just want to make sure I stress that you're right. The Rock slash Dwayne Johnson, he's white famous, right? So white people love
Hmm.
him. They
Hmm.
also love Mindy Kaling. And Mindy
Hmm.
Kaling is the producer and a
Yeah.
writer for Sex Lives of College Girls.
Yeah.
Although in this instance, the first gen student again is the white character, but damn,
Hmm.
we've stumbled across this major trope here, right?
I know.
Major stereotype.
Yeah. Yeah. So does it, what kind of, oh, so the Rock is at University of Miami, you said?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, so big, a pretty elite school as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not.
Mhm.
It's a big public school.
Some people I know, but
Mhm.
some people I feel like I talk to are like, okay, no offense to anyone.
No, no offense, but I wouldn't. It's not like it's not okay. It's not
It's a
honestly.
big, but it's like a big, it's a well-known school. Let's put
It's
it
a
that way.
well-known school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
So that's still a part of it.
Hmm.
And did you watch all three of those?
I did. I did
Okay.
watch the selected episodes, not like the
Oh,
series
okay.
or anything like
Okay.
that.
Alright.
Yeah.
Mm.
I my understanding is that the sex lives of college girls that they really dig into her
Mm.
experience as being first
Mhm.
gen beyond the one episode that I've seen. Like it's consistent.
Okay.
She's also white. So-
Okay.
okay. You're thinking. Okay, we really about to get into it now because we are going to look at drama. And I would say this is probably I will say it should be a tough category, but it probably won't be, and I'll say why.
Oh, yes. I did see that
Oh,
on the ballot.
yeah.
This is hard. Okay.
So, so a couple of things of note about this particular category, and who knows, we could spend a whole hour just talking about this category. One, notice that none of these are on what do we call it now? Regular TV. I don't even know what to say anymore. Um,
Cable?
these are all Netflix stars.
Okay.
Yeah, like it's
Mhm.
and it could be difficult actually to
Mhm.
for some people to access some of
Okay.
these storylines.
Mhm.
David Makes Man is similar to The Rock in the sense that what you see there are two different time periods in David's life. So there's older David. You see like the guy in profile. That's young
Mhm.
David and older David. And
Okay.
so he's often talking to himself in the storyline. And
Oh.
he attends a young David attends a private like a private high school or something like that.
Mhm.
Last Chance U, really popular TV series. They won the Catalyst Award last year when the series focused on football. This year, the series focuses on basketball for the first time. Those students go to community college. Why am I blanking? They go to community college in LA. Oh, they go to
Okay.
ELAC,
Mm.
they go to East LA. Um, Panic, the that character there, she participates in like a Hunger Games style competition
Okay.
because she needs the money in order to go to college. But
Oh.
it's a public school.
Mhm.
It's not she's not trying to go to Stanford.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and Made is really popular,
Yeah.
based on the real life experiences
Mhm.
of a person, and it is. I don't. I think she's just attending. I don't like community college or something like that. Like her first goal. We'll come back to Made, and then Ghost. So this is actually the spinoff of Power. Okay, and so in Power, the main character gets all of his capital, in an extra legal way, right? So it's kind of
Okay.
like The
Mhm.
Godfather. right? But
Okay.
then
Hmm.
he has a family, so they're wealthy. But then he dies. The son, this is a spinoff. This is about his son who goes to a Stanford like institution, goes to a private school. So first gen, but has money. And,
Ah,
ah,
finally.
finally, we're almost at the
Hmm.
end.
I know.
So this is a span of really complex story. I'm thinking about some really complex storylines and backgrounds. What what comes to mind for you?
Also need to see all these. I did see Last Chance U some episodes when it was football.
Okay.
Um, and that's interesting. I'll tell you what's coming up for me, and it's probably going to be somewhat unexpected. But when I was just thinking about, this conversation and um, my thoughts on like the tropes and things like that. Okay, we're going to take a quick tangent.
Yep.
I've been very, like, honestly, the word is obsessed with the Elizabeth Holmes story, which also involves Stanford. I know. So
What's that? What is that?
it's the woman who started Theranos. It was a company that was gonna like revolutionize how we test blood.
Oh,
And it was gonna test like just a tiny little amount of blood and run all these tests on it. And it turned out to like be a hoax or whatever. Or, she never actually made this machine that she claimed
oh,
to make. So
okay.
now she's on trial. And like they make a big deal about the fact that she went to Stanford again for a year and
Wow.
then dropped out. So she dropped out after a year and started this company.
Okay.
And that has kind of been on my mind. And then when I was like thinking about this conversation and about these awards and these stories, it's just really interesting to me, like the juxtaposition of like usually low income kids for whom college is like their last chance. Like the Last Chance U, right? Is like, this is it. You're gonna put all your energy into this. You're gonna go into this Hunger Games thing and get this money so you can go to college because this is it. This is all you got.
Is it?
This is
Yeah.
the one path. Um, and and then we have on the other side these stories of people who had that, who would have had to like really fail hard to not end up at like really elite schools
Like go out of
and
your
then
way.
dropped out. So on the one side we have this
Ooh.
storyline of college as being your one ticket, right? But for some people, they don't even need that ticket. And
Ooh.
like, and they're famous because they didn't use that ticket, because they were
That's right.
like, I dropped out. I left
Right.
before
Right.
even graduating.
Yeah.
And that was a part of her allure. That was
Mm-hmm.
a part of her allure, that like she didn't even need to go to Stanford. She didn't even need to finish going to Stanford. And that's,
Mm.
I would say, part of the reason she was able to dupe a lot of people. Um, and so I don't know. It's just I honestly haven't come to like a conclusion on this. It's just been on my mind of just
Mm-hmm.
how crucial and critical college is sold on one end. And I think there's a huge conversation to be had about whether it is, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
that is the only path to success. But for a lot of first gen would be students, it's sold as the only way to success. And then on the other side, I don't know, people just being really successful, not because they didn't go to college, but you know what I mean? Like they didn't
Yeah.
even need to go to college to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
successful.
Oh, okay.
So
Let me
that's
let me take
what that's
let me
bringing
take
up
that.
to me.
Let's go
Okay.
up. Let's go up. Let's go
All
up.
right.
Okay. Because here's what I think. This is the one time I'm going to say this about these categories,
Okay.
about who I think will win versus what I think should win.
Okay.
I'm pretty confident Made will win for many of
Very
the things.
popular. It's very
Very
popular.
popular, but like poor white women is where all the sympathy goes, right? Like you did what? You had to do what? You had to clean houses, right?
Uh-huh.
So there's I mean, clearly, like in every category so
Mhm.
far, like there's been that thing, like that's selling right now, that's hot, that's where we can get some empathy.
Mhm.
Then when you look at what I think should win is Ghost,
Mhm.
because now take what you just said about these individuals who don't need it, right? Who dropped out. How many times do we see that over and over? Zuckerberg and all these types of people. This time the character is black, right? He
Mhm.
doesn't need to go to college.
Yeah.
He is successful. They have money. And then I want to tie in with something you said earlier. The question is, so why is this still in the storyline? There's something there. There's something the creators, there's a point they're trying to make still about this character. And what I in the one episode I've seen, they're really showing the nuances of a first gen experience that is separate from, I mean, class is part of it, but they're really trying to say, what does it mean for him to be the first in his family to go to college,
Yeah.
even when he has money, right? And he's
Mhm.
engaging with his peers or talking to
Mhm.
his instructors,
Yeah.
and he's not playing he's not on the basketball team, right? But
Mhm.
there's a reason why Tariq is there. There's something that about him, about his background. His
Yeah.
storyline is like really, really complex. Like when we're talking
Mhm.
about complex narratives, I think that Ghost, this TV show is really trying to do something that we don't really see anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, to your point about Maid, I was in a conversation with someone who really likes that story, and I haven't seen it at all. And you know, I had just brought up a point I'd heard somewhere else, of like, having a maid who's a white woman is interesting, right? Given that a lot of maids are not white. And this person said, but it's a really good story and it's based on a true experience. It's a true story. And I said, that's fine. And I don't think that information precludes that story from being a good story, right? It
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
be a good story and it can
Hmm.
be, um, a really good, light shown on how hard it is, for example, to leave an abusive relationship and things like that. Those things can still be true, but going back to the decision makers of who gets to decide whose story gets told, right? Because we have a lot of people of color who have very similar stories, and then
That didn't get made. That
yeah,
didn't get
and
made.
so they didn't, yeah, and it's just, I don't know, it is really interesting. um it's always hard for me to like say these things because people think I'm putting intention in people's decisions, and I'm really not, right? Like it's just, these are the stories we think will sell. There's some gut instinct in it, which is usually implicit bias. But um, it, it's it's just about how surprising, as you kind of alluded to, these stories are. She shouldn't have to do this. She shouldn't have to have this experience, but she does, and she gets through it. And I I think that says a lot about our expectations of people from other groups, right?
Hmm.
Like, oh, well, that's just their normal story. So like, why would we talk
Hmm.
about that?
Right.
So
It's
um
not gonna sell.
and it's not, maybe it's not as compelling to a broader audience, right?
Hmm.
When it feels, I don't think it is, but it feels more niche,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
Um because yeah, like people are gonna be like, oh, but it's this guy who has money and he's going to college for that. So who will that resonate with? But again, if you actually watch stuff, two things. One, you should watch things that are not your experience and
Hmm.
understand that, right? But
Hmm.
also once you start watching things that are not your experience, you realize you do have things in common. There are
Hmm.
kind of realities that transcend, you know, different people's lives and things like that. So um we'll see. We'll see what wins.
Okay, we got
We'll
one
see
more
what wins.
category. I
Okay.
cannot wait to get your thoughts on this one. It is a new category for us this year. and that is podcast. So
Mhm.
almost almost immediately after last year's winners were announced, folks reached out to me and suggested that we also include podcasts, because it is a documentation of storytelling. Um, and so just want to get a shout out to all the producers of these podcasts and talk about some obvious things. And we're not going to ignore the fact that these are all women of color. We
Mhm.
also cannot ignore the fact that these are also Latin. Many of four of the five identify as Latinx women. One more thing. Uh, let's see. We've got Latinas with masters, doctoral journeys with Katie, and grad school femtoring. Also addressing a graduate school experience, and oftentimes Eve does as well in First Gen Lounge, and I think Cafecito also addresses grad school too. So, I mean, there's so many ways we can go with this, but you kick
Yeah.
us off. What are your thoughts about these?
Well, so I have listened to Femtoring because our
Okay,
wonderful friend Stephanie Youngblood was
yeah,
a
and shout out to
guest.
Yvette as well.
And so I listened to that episode and I just thought to myself, what would my experience have been like if I had had a podcast to listen to? I
Right.
can't even imagine. I can't. It's so hard. Um, so that was really my first thoughts, and I've already recommended that podcast to students in graduate school right now. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
hoping it's the perspective that I know they sorely need. I know I sorely needed that in graduate school. I'm sure you know that feeling well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the other thing is, you know, I'll just be like really blunt about it that
All right.
there are interesting gender differences in the ways that we cope with being first gen in graduate school specifically because of course it's not true across the board. None of these differences ever are true across the board, but I see a lot more women thinking to themselves, how can I help the next generation not go through what I went through or have
Mm-hmm.
a better experience than I had? And I see it now. I see it now even among faculty. Um, and I do see some men doing that as well. Um, but I see more instances, and this isn't to say the majority of the men I talk to, but I see more instances among men that is very I made it so other people can make it too,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's still inspiring in its own way, right? This like, yes, it was hard for me. Here's what I did. Um, and you can work hard as well. And I think the women I know of are more likely to call out the institutions and say, this is where the
Mm-hmm.
institution is messing up. And yes, it's awful and you shouldn't have to deal with it, but it is what it is. So here's how we're going to get through it together. And that to me is very clear in the podcast. So,
I want to mark the day and time, December 11th, 11:48 a.m. because Chantel, honestly, I think I think we've identified something that could potentially be really powerful, impactful, and game changing. So many questions come to mind. I love you talking about like the gender differences. We also need to talk about how the fact that Latinx women are turning to podcasts as a vehicle for this type of work, right?
mhm,
So when we go back and look at all these other categories, very little representation was of Latinx women. We had
mhm,
Kiara's memoir. Kiara is the screenwriter for In the Heights. So basically,
mhm,
it's her story expanded.
yeah,
But where else
mhm,
did we see that, right?
yeah,
Um,
mhm,
Oftentimes, funny enough, in research, Latinx first gen research, Latinx students are overrepresented. but we're seeing them
Mhm.
underrepresented in popular
Mhm.
culture. And what I would argue is that we're seeing um, Latinx women use podcasts
Yeah.
as part of counter storytelling, right? But it also says to us that podcasts are meaningful. Like this is a viable way to do this. I just think people need to. They're gonna go back. They're gonna because people are gonna be late when they catch on to this. So 5, 7 years from now, people will start to go back and say, "Wow, look at what was happening
Yeah.
in this space."
Yeah.
And the stories that are being told.
Yeah. I think too, it's in physical spaces, and I did this, right? I did this as a grad student. We create the community we don't have. So when I was when I was at Stanford, and the advice I give to all of my students going into graduate school, because most of them are first gen, most of them are black and brown, and various identities that will probably make them feel out of place, is that you have to create the community that you need, because you will need it, right? You can't just grit your teeth and bear it and get through it. You may be able to, but it's going to be really hard. But
Hmm.
if you start to reach out and say, hey, I know we don't know each other, I know we're not even in the same program, but can we have lunch? Can we have coffee? Do you know of any place near campus that sells XYZ foods, things like that? Um, that's why I had met Michael Tubbs, right? Because I just started walking up to, I literally walked up
Mm.
to people on campus and was like, hello, what program are you in? Um,
Oh, you
and
make my back
so
hurt.
I think that this is in that spirit, right? We now have the ability to create community outside of physical spaces, in spite of physical spaces. And where I was coming to it of saying, well, because there's so few of us across this campus, I have to reach out across the entire campus, right? Regardless of what program you're in, what degree you're getting, all this stuff, where you're from, all that stuff, we're going to create this little group. Um, that goal can now be met through podcast. It's a very cheap, easy way to
Right?
create community.
That's right.
And so I'm honestly not that surprised that
Hmm.
the podcast um, medium is so popular among that group. So
Yeah, but that's because you're a prophet, right? And so you see things before they happen. Other people, like I said, 7 years from now, Shantizi, they're gonna be like, "What? What was happening over here?" But the fact that number one, after just 1 year of this awards, people to say to me, "Hey, we should be including podcasts
mhm, mhm,
as a viable form of representation and storytelling," tells us what the people need and the people want, and then
yeah.
the scholars will be all late and everything and catch up on
Mhm,
it. But
mhm.
I'm so excited um, to have included this category this year,
Yeah.
and of course, everyone's a winner. So I'm just no, seriously,
If
like
I
shout.
if I if I'm sure all of the nominees are like, it was an honor just to be considered.
Yeah, but I also want to say that some of those were like just started up this year, like Dr. Katie's podcast just launched, so Eve, on the other hand, has been doing it for a minute. So, and many of those folks were in the Facebook group as well. And I know
Mhm.
Katie was partly inspired by conversations that were happening in that group. So, always, as always, shout out to the empowering first and grad students community there. But as we are approaching the end, oh my gosh, I just wanted to just turn to you to get just some final thoughts of the moment, or some things that either we could approach a number of ways. Anything surprise you? Any things that you felt were missing? And you get to close us out.
You.
No
Well,
pressure.
okay. No pressure at all. I can't. It's hard to say what could potentially be missing, since I haven't actually engaged with a lot of these nominees, but I will in the next over the break. You know how, like, us academics, we have so many plans over the break.
Yeah, that's why we changed the timing this
I'll
year.
add this.
Yeah,
Yes, I'll add
yeah,
this to my list of the many things I plan to get done over the break. But
yeah.
I think when we were emailing, we were chatting about things we could bring up, and one thing that I don't know if we really touched on is just why it's so important to look at representations in pop culture, right? Not just the first gen, but just in
Oh,
general.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
you and I, we study this stuff, we think about it probably an obscene amount. Like obscene amount of our thoughts are dedicated to pop culture. And as you were saying, like you should bring a lens to it, you should be critical of it. um but I just think that a lot of people, like I was saying, my students always have this assumption that pop culture just exists. And I really want to encourage people to think about the true like weight that pop culture has in our society, because we are so, as humans, like it honestly astounds me how addicted we are to stories about humans, right? Like it is all we do. We listen to stories, we watch stories, we get invested in characters that don't actually exist. And it's really important to know that those are the ways in which we understand ourselves and we understand each other, because we are not interacting really in deep ways with a lot of the people around us, but we get these insights through these stories, through these representations that we might not otherwise have. And if those insights
Hmm.
are problematic in any way,
Hmm.
that can have some really
That's right.
pretty, you know, big ramifications. I mean,
Hmm.
even just to think about, I'm sure there is a way that we can connect the dots. There might be a number of them, but where we can look at the ways in which first gen students are represented in media and what colleges are deciding they're going to do in welcoming and
Hmm.
being inclusive of first gen students, right?
Hmm.
So the very representations we're seeing on Netflix are going to have an effect on a real student who is enrolling in a
That's right.
college nearby,
Right.
because some administrator will be like, oh yeah, I guess
Uh-huh.
we should think about that group of students, you know?
Uh-huh. I watch
Um,
Maid. Yeah.
yeah. um, and so yeah, so representations of all groups are important, but um, I think first gen student representations are unique in that way, right? Where it can lead to like actual policy changes or norm changes on college campuses, because it's now a group that people are aware of, which is wild. It's There have been conversations sometimes in our Facebook group where this group is still new to people, and I'm just
Oh,
like,
oh,
what?
like the first gen
Yeah,
population group. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm like, oh. This
Right.
is still, you're still okay. I'll come back when you've like
Right. Right.
had the moment.
Yeah.
Like it's not the people in our group, right? But it's the stories that people in our group share, where it's clear that administrators on their campus
Right.
are just now figuring out that this is an important student population, which is wild to me. So
Hmm.
yeah,
And how people are getting their information and TV shows, podcasts, film. They're easier to digest, right?
yeah, hmm,
They're gonna watch Made before they read your research
yeah,
report. So
hmm,
yeah. Well,
yeah,
Professor Chantel Marshall,
yeah,
always Shantizi to me. Thank you so much
yeah.
for today. I'm kind of nervous about your prediction that this will just be the prologue to our own podcast, but
Oh my gosh. I mean, I just want to thank you. I'm sure everybody watching just adores you the way I do. And so I just want to thank you for having this conversation with me. It's been super fun.
it is fun, and I'm really excited for when the awardees are announced, which will be in late January, and that is a change from before. So that we are giving people opportunity during the break to like watch and
Mm,
read and listen. So
mhm,
people look out
mhm.
for that.
Hey, very exciting.
Yay.
Who named the award? 'Cause it's the perfect name.
I don't know if it was me or Renee Stovall, who was one of
Okay.
our admins. I think it was
Mhm.
Renee. I'm going to give credit to Renee for that.
All right, go Renee.
Yeah. Catalyst
It's a great
Awards.
name.
Whoop, whoop.
Hmm. Hmm.
All right. Chantel, you stay by, but thanks everybody for listening and watching.